Hello, hello, everybody. We are going to get into a little bit of history with the agricultural origins and also diffusion. Here's the unit at a glance. So the objectives and essential learning that are going to be at the center today. So you need to identify major centers of domestication of plants and animals. So we'll be looking at some of the very early hearths and civilizations where we first saw agriculture pop up, as well as how plants and animals diffused globally. So hopefully some of this is familiar from some of your previous humanities courses. So first, let's take a look at agricultural hearths. And hopefully many of you guys remember that term hearth, which is a geographic origin of a trait, characteristic, innovation, or other concept. So essentially where something originated or where it was born or where it was first made. Let's talk a little bit about domestication and what that means. So when we talk about domestication in agriculture, that is the deliberate effort to grow plants and raise animals to make them accessible for human demand. This is something that happened a little bit over time, and that began in these agricultural hearths. So these are separate locations in which groups of people began to domesticate plants and animals. So here we have the array of agricultural hearths. Here we see cases of independent invention in that these were isolated incidences of agriculture. So make sure that you guys know all of these, especially the Fertile Crescent. That's probably the one of most note, and we'll start with that one. So this one is known as being like the first civilization, hence the little trophy here. This is considered the first place where agriculture began. Also called a breadbasket because of the crops that were grown there, so like barley, wheat, lentils. The animals that they domesticated in that area first include sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs. And this is right here. So parts of modern day Iran, and it is surrounded by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And next we have Southeast Asia. Let me move this way. There we go. So over here in this area, this region is definitely far more tropical. This was about 10,000 years ago where we started to first see agriculture pop up. And the crops that are associated with that area include things like sugarcane, taro, coconuts, mangoes, bananas, rice, tea. So definitely more tropical types of agriculture. Then East Asia, right over here, modern day China, and the crops that are most associated with that region, rice, soybeans, and walnuts. And keep in mind that all of these crops by now, contemporary times have definitely diffused to many other areas of the world. And next we have sub-Saharan Africa. This was about 7,000 years ago, and this includes two areas, including the Nile River Valley, which actually also goes all the way up here, as well as West Africa. So coffee, this is where coffee comes from. That's probably the crop that's most notable to sub-Saharan Africa. Mesoamerica, right over here. This includes the area where modern day like Mexico and Central America is. So things like sweet potatoes, definitely beans and maize or corn, chilies, peppers, all sorts of good stuff. And the animals that are associated are llamas and alpaca, especially for the Andes right down here where the Inca Empire was. All right, so for these agricultural hearths, like I mentioned, these were all instances of independent invention. So this is when the same idea, which in this case is agriculture, plant and animal domestication, occurs separately without being influenced by each other or without being influenced by other groups of people. So if we think about, these were all cases of independent invention. All these different regions came up with this idea of agriculture on their own. There are definitely commonalities that are across the board. So even though each of them has their unique, maybe agricultural specialties, we see that they tend to be in fertile soil in river valleys. So having that fertile soil was key. And during this time period, without the technology that we have now, that was mostly limited to river valleys. Having availability of water, especially pre-irrigation systems, moderate climates, and also collective societal structures. In other words, having some form of civilization in order to organize. This also means that if there's agriculture, there tends to be food surplus, which means that there's more population, which then means that there's more of a need to organize into some sort of civilization. For diffusion, we do have a few different types of diffusion that have occurred through agriculture. So agriculture first diffused to immediate surrounding areas that were close to each of these different hearths. That had to do with close contact and proximity between farmers. So because of this, they were then able to share their various practices and methods that they used to domesticate plants and animals. So for instance, this idea of agriculture and animal domestication, beginning in the Fertile Crescent, then diffused to areas that were most nearby, such as Turkey and modern-day Turkey and Eastern Europe. We also have relocation diffusion using immigration and migration. So if we think about people when they move, they bring foods, they bring their ingredients, they bring seeds and animals with them, and that is just part of their culture, right? And eventually that led into trade, right? Especially along the Silk Road, for instance. Once people take these different agricultural products, we do see instances of stimulus diffusion as well, where once they move to these new locations, maybe the seeds are not as prosperous, and there has to be some sort of adaptation in order to use those seeds, or in order to maybe combine various agricultural practices. So we see that here with some of that overlap. Even if we think about maybe the same ingredient or the same maybe animal, right? The preparation and use of that part of agriculture can vary from place to place. And then trade routes. So the Silk Road, like I mentioned before, this was over 4,000 miles of trade routes. And it started from China and went all the way into Europe. And this meant that there was so many different people interacting. So we saw the spread of these plants and animals through that trade through East Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. And that also led to contagious diffusion. And along this Silk Road, it wasn't only agricultural products and practices that were diffusing, but also other ideas and goods as well. The Columbian Exchange, hopefully everybody here is familiar with that at least. But this was this enormous exchange of goods and ideas between North America, Africa, and Europe. So here we have this little graphic here. This was initiated by Columbus's voyage to the Americas in 1492. It wasn't until then that we really saw that travel between that area. And this meant that we had far more plants, animals, and also, unfortunately, diseases that were spread between the old world, or this area, right, like Europe and Africa, and the New World, which is North and South America. We also saw, once these things diffused to these different areas, contagious diffusion to continue to spread them in their various locations, right? So once we see goods coming over to the various ports within Europe, then spreading more into the mainland area of Europe. So for modern diffusion of agriculture, so everything we talked about up until this point has been historic. more modern diffusions of agriculture include something called the Green Revolution. Maybe you guys remember some of this from our population unit. So this was the spread of high yield varieties of crops around the world. So this used science and technology in order to create new varieties of plants to replace the more traditional crops. And the whole idea behind this was that agriculture would yield far more and maybe take less time, be more resistant to maybe different weather occurrences and things like drought and stuff like that. And it was meant, when we spoke about it in Unit 2, to help this population boom, right, that humans experience. So through the Green Revolution, we were able to make more food since we have so many people on this earth. This also, the demand for meat has increased a lot in modern times. So because of increasing wealth, because of this lifestyle, right? Everybody's chasing a modern lifestyle. That kind of goes hand in hand with having animal protein. So now we see fast food chains like McDonald's that are making meat more accessible to a larger population than ever before. So just one final little recap of this objective. We went over the diffusion of agriculture for some historic examples, as well as a little bit more modern examples with the Green Revolution. All right.